I would tell my younger self to believe in myself and have confidence and really know what my voice is as a filmmaker. I think starting out, you kind of start to try to shape who you are as a filmmaker and just really believing in what that voice is and holding true to it. That's an interesting question because it's something that's hard to articulate what it is, but what I feel like your voice is your point of view on the world. Especially right now, it's important for women and underrepresented like diversity to like put their voice out there and to have their stories heard. And so, really, it is just who you are as a person, but also your point of view on the world. Is really what your voice is, whether it's, a dramatic voice, a comedic voice, it's your voice and it's unique and it deserves to be out there. Well, I think the Lego movies are all, the tone is very, a lot of us that make those films all kind of have a similar tone, so it's really nice that you say it kind of feels indie in some ways because, we don't like to make them just broad comedies. We like to make them smart and interesting and, commenting on different political and maybe not necessarily political, but social and that kind of like, make them smart and kind of thinking comedies. But the tone of the films did start with Chris Miller and Phil Lord, who, made the first Lego movie, and also Chris McKay and his humor. So they really did give us like a template of how these movies are made, but it just attracts the same kind of person. A lot of us that came to work on the movies have a very similar sensibility, and I've worked with Chris McKay for years, and we have a very similar sense of humor. And so, I guess it is uniquely yours, but also part of this like collaborative team at the same time. I feel like it's a little bit of both. I feel like because I've had a few different mentors, there's different styles, obviously, and I think somebody can mentor you and have their own style, and you learn from it. You say like, oh, I understand that's the way that they do it, and maybe not the way I do it, or you can learn how to shape your own way of working just by learning from somebody, whether you're going to adapt to that style or just not adapt that style, but still learn something from it. But I would say, a lot of my mentors were very collaborative and, wanting to give others on the crew a voice. And I think that that's important, and that's what I took with me. Is that's what I love. It makes me feel comfortable as a filmmaker to like hear other people's points of views and opinions. I think it shapes your story and makes it more rich. So I definitely learned that, but also adapted it in my own way. I mean, that has been great. I feel very honored and lucky and appreciative. I think that that's important to always remain appreciative and humbled in your going forward. But it has enabled me to tell the stories I want to tell. So it's not, I don't just have to say, oh, I have to do this project or whatever. I get to get excited about the stories that I want to tell and put, forward the heroes of stories that I want to see that haven't been represented. So obviously in my own work, I always like to make strong female characters, multiple strong female characters, which, a lot of films are starting to adapt as well. It's not just one, there's multiple female characters that are, multidimensional. So that's been really great to have the opportunity to be able to do that and to say what kind of stories I want to put on screen. I think it's many different things, but I will say the main thing is the characters are, they're just a little, how do you say, like the audience can put themselves, I think, in more characters in animation, so you can hit harder subjects, or you can see yourself in a character that doesn't necessarily represent you completely, Like, I guess an example I can think of right now is when I saw Inside Out, and I was watching that moment between the lead character and Bing Bong, the imaginary friend, It's like, I know that that moment in time did not happen to me, and I didn't look like those characters, but I just started crying because it reminded me of my imaginary friend and the loss and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, it's so emotional. And I know like the person next to me probably had their own experience with that moment. So I think animation just kind of like opens a world where you can kind of put your own experiences in these characters, because they're just, they're not just this realistic representation of what you're supposed to be seeing on screen. It's a lot more expressive and, open for your own interpretation. I think now is a particularly interesting time in our field, and I think now is the time to be bold. A lot of my animation colleagues and friends and, collaborators, we always talk about the dream is for people to see animation as a medium and not just a genre, so it's not like, oh, all animated films are, for kids, or for, like, you don't typecast it. It's a medium. It's like you can express yourself in multiple ways. And I think we're starting to see that with what we were talking about earlier, is like R-rated animation and things like that. But I think now is a particular time where people are hungry to see that and are interested to see it. And I really just, I want to continue that because I think it's going to bring more interesting stories to screen. I don't know. It's interesting because it's like, as a woman, of course I identify as a woman, but I don't constantly think of that. I think of myself as a creator and a filmmaker, and that's how I've thought of myself, since I was little, and I knew that I wanted to make films. And it is interesting once, you get into the industry and it starts to be highlighted. Even in film school, I was one of 2 women always in my film classes. And then when I went into production film, not just theory, I was oftentimes the only woman in my class. So it is something that I look around and I'm like, oh, there's not a whole lot of people like me. And so then when I got into, working in the film industry, I think it was highlighted only because I was one woman or 2 women in the room. And what's really great is now that the conversation is opening up, there are more of us, and we're bringing more people along, and I'll bring my editor friends or my storyboard artist friends, and it's like there's more women in the room, and we're all collaborating. So that's really exciting to see that change starting to happen. And I think that we just need to own it and continue to, be the best filmmakers we can be, and to have our voices be heard, and to know that the uniqueness of this time right now, that people are like listening and wanting to hear, and to just keep moving forward and to, be a filmmaker. It's interesting because I think every culture and every, country has their own, there's some things that Germany is very advanced on that we are not. And so I think everybody has their different, struggles with different elements of that. So I'm just glad that now they are doing it. And Women in Animation has been a powerful organization, I know, for myself, and also for friends and advice I've given to people I've mentored and things like that. So I know it's a fantastic organization, in Los Angeles. I've seen it grow into Vancouver. And now to have it in Germany and be a presence and part of a conversation, I think it's going to just like open up the industry here and really give women a voice and a strength. So I think it's a great thing. I don't think to affect change you necessarily need to be gentle. I think there's definitely a time and place to be loud and angry about things, and stand on that soapbox. But in my panel, I was giving a specific example of, knowing someone was talking over me, and knowing I was in a room where I wasn't being heard, and trying to make my voice heard in that room and being firm, but also not being combative, because I don't think that you're going to get results by saying, you're not listening to me, and then it becomes a screaming fest of like, just 2 people then just trying to have their voice heard in a room. So having your voice heard in a confident way, but then taking that person aside and saying, listen, you kept talking over me, and it becomes more of a constructive conversation, because I think in that particular moment I was giving an example of, it's just, I knew in that moment it's having a one-on-one with somebody was going to be more, give me better results than actually being in a room and being just confrontational to a point where I wouldn't be heard in that moment, and it would just be a defense mechanism on that other person's part. Because I don't think people like to hear, you're talking over me, or you're doing this, or you're doing that. It feels very accusatory, and so I knew in that moment I would get a result by just making it a conversation rather than an accusation. That's an interesting question because I've done both live action and animation, so I'm someone who really believes that the way that your film is made, whether it's live action or animation, should just be based on what is best for the story, like how it's told. So I'm also somebody who likes to mix live action and animation a lot because I find that's really interesting, of like just different points of views and different ways to articulate story. So I've lived in both worlds and I've gone back and forth between both worlds, and I do think there is a little bit of a difference in the live action model where it's like everything is really intense for those 30 to 60 or however many shooting days you're lucky enough to have. And it's all at once, and it's just kind of, there's a lot of pre-planning and then there's a lot of post, but animation is that for, years, 3 years, where you're just dealing with every department kind of across multiple years. And I think that feels very different to the live action crowd, because I've worked with a lot of live action people that have come into animation and they're like, hang on now, what is this world? So yeah, it is. I would say it's different, but it's once, you kind of live in both worlds, it's more similar than you think in a lot of ways.